Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta, Volume 4, In Every Town and Village, Around the World, 1968 to 1971. A biography of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, by Satsvarup Das Goswami. Chapter 3, A Threat Against ISKCON. Boston, December 21st, 1969. More than 100 of Prabhupada's disciples and followers are in the lobby of the international terminal of Boston's Logan Airport. Kirtanananda Swami has come from New Vrindavan with a truckload of devotees. The devotees from New York are here with a large banner. New York ISKCON welcomes Srila Prabhupada. Most of the devotees wear heavy coats over their dhotis and saris and are chanting Hare Krishna. Some play drums and cymbals. A few babies and children are present. Waiting passengers can only watch, startled. Prabhupada's plane is late, and the devotees continue chanting, often leaping into the air with outstretched arms. They haven't seen Prabhupada in a long time, and they are waiting, expecting to see him at any moment. Oblivious of the proprieties of being in public, the devotees chant emotionally, building almost to uncontrolled ecstasy. The state police step in to tell the biggest devotee, Brahmananda, cool it. The chanting falls away to a murmur of japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The plane from London arrives. The devotees are unable to see the passengers entering in the glassed-in immigration and customs area because the bottom 6 feet of the glass wall is painted black. Straining to see over the top, the devotees press forward, chanting, feverish, some almost hysterical. Suddenly they see Prabhupada's raised hand with bead bag on the other side of the wall. They can see only his raised hand and bead bag. They go wild. Fearlessly, with drums and kartals, the kirtan explodes again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Advaita is cheerfully smashing the kartals together and chanting. Brahmananda, jumping up and down, trying to glimpse into the customs room, is crying uncontrollably and yelling, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, free of customs, suddenly appears before them. Kirtanananda Swami, reserved until now, leaps around airport chairs and runs to him. Everyone is pushing and running, trying to be where Prabhupada is. Prabhupada's saffron robes are wrinkled from the long flight, and he wears a knit sweater. He holds his white plastic attaché case in his left hand, and again raises his right arm with forefinger and thumb extended from the beanbag. He smiles wonderfully, beaming to his children. Devotees cheer and cry, all glories to Prabhupada. As he walks toward a saffron-covered sofa in the airport lounge, the devotees move with him in an ecstatic wave, pressing in close. He sits down. Paramananda, from New Vrindavan, comes forward with his infant son, the first boy born in ISKCON, and holds him forward to Prabhupada for blessings. Prabhupada is smiling, and the devotees are completely, unabashedly blissful. Where is Hayagriva? Prabhupada asks. The question is repeated by the devotees, and big Hayagriva lurches through the crowd, grumbling and falling flat at Prabhupada's feet in obeisance. One by one, the leaders of the various ISKCON centers come forward and place garland after garland around Prabhupada. Prabhupada looks beyond the wall of devotees at the newsmen and with their cameras, and at the baffled, curious, and disdainful onlookers. A bystander says, I think he must be some kind of politician. So, Prabhupada begins speaking. The spiritual master is to be worshipped as God, but if he is thinking that he is God, then he is useless. My request is, please don't take Krishna consciousness as a sectarian religion. Prabhupada explains that Krishna consciousness is a great science, culminating in pure love of God. These boys and girls had never heard of Krishna before, Prabhupada continues, but now they have taken it up so naturally because it is natural. Prabhupada says that he is an old man, yet he is sure that even if he passes away, his students will continue the Krishna consciousness movement. The potency of this movement is such that it can awaken awareness of God within anyone's heart. After the lecture, Prabhupada stands and is escorted outside, where a limousine waits to drive him off through the newly fallen snow. Riding joyfully in the car with Prabhupada were Kirtanananda Swami, Brahmananda, Satsvarup, and Purushottama. A professional chauffeur drove. Prabhupada talked of London. It was an old aristocratic city, he said, and the temple was in a very influential area near the British Museum. The location is, what is it called? Downtown? They passed a large billboard advertising a restaurant and lounge, Continental. On seeing the billboard, Prabhupada said, Chintamani. What is that? Oh no, Continental. The devotees looked at one another. Chintamani. Prabhupada had thought that the sign had read Chintamani, meaning the spiritual gems that make up the transcendental land of Krishna Loka. But Prabhupada himself was Chintamani, pure and innocent, coming to the cold, dirty city of Boston, yet always thinking of Krishna wherever he was. How fortunate to be with him. Satsvarup glanced at the professional chauffeur. Drive carefully, he said. Prabhupada spoke softly from the back seat, while the devotees in front peered back, barely able to see him in the darkness, and completely awed by his friendly yet inconceivable presence. The other day, he said, I told George Harrison that if he thought his money belonged to him, that was Maya. At the summer tunnel, the limousine pulled up at an automatic toll booth. The driver threw a coin into the chute, and the red light turned green. Prabhupada asked if sometimes people drove through without paying, and Brahmananda replied that an alarm would go off. They moved ahead into the Sumner Tunnel. Usually an eerie, nerve-wracking place, but not when riding with Prabhupada. I told George to give his money to Krishna, Prabhupada said. Not that he had to give it to Krishna by giving it to me necessarily, but that somehow or other he must spend all his money for Krishna. But you are the only way to Krishna, Brahmananda said. Prabhupada laughed lightly. Yes, he admitted, at least in the West. This was the great privilege of being able to ride with Prabhupada, to hear him say little things or serious things, and to see his fathomless expression or his kind smiling. It was a rare opportunity. I am representing unadulterated teachings, Prabhupada continued. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, surrender to me, and I say, surrender to Krishna. It is very simple. So many swamis come and present themselves as Krishna, and it is all spoiled. But I say surrender to Krishna. I do not say anything new or adulterated. Krishna says, surrender to me, and I say, surrender to Krishna. Prabhupada asked Brahmananda if 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead magazine were being printed. Brahmananda answered that they were. Good, Prabhupada replied. Turning his attention to Satsvarup, Prabhupada asked how the composing machine was working, and Satsvarup said that hundreds of pages were being composed each month. Prabhupada asked Kirtanananda Swami about New Vrindavan. New Vrindavan would improve, Prabhupada said. The only thing wrong was that it got blocked up in the winter. Each devotee in the car felt completely satisfied by his brief exchange with Prabhupada, and they rode with him intoxicated in spiritual bliss. Most of the devotees had raced ahead to the temple on Beacon Street and were waiting excitedly. The limousine pulled up, and again the devotees were unrestrained in their adoration of their spiritual master. Regally, Prabhupada walked up the walkway onto the porch steps, through the front door and into the vestibule, where he gazed around at the purple walls and the pink and green doorways. Surrounded by cheers and loving looks, he smiled. The second-floor parlor, now the temple room, was filled with more than 150 disciples and guests, and they could see Prabhupada's form rise into view as he came up the stairs. He still carried his white attaché case in his left hand and his bead bag in his right. And although he had just come out of the winter's night, he wore no coat, only cotton robes and a sweater. He appeared radiant. Prabhupada approached the altar. He seemed to notice everything: the small Radha Krishna deities enthroned beneath a red velvet canopy, the larger deities of Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram, on a raised shelf above the picture of Lord Chaitanya and his Sankirtan party. Even the brass arti paraphernalia brightly shining on the small table near the altar. Turning to his secretary and traveling companion, Purushottama, he asked, "What do you think, Purushottama? Isn't this very nice?" Crossing the room, Prabhupada sat on the red velvet Vyasasan. He spoke, and the audience was attentive. After praising the London Centre, the deity worshipped there, the expertly made puris for Radha and Krishna, he turned toward the altar and said, "If you clean the deity's utensils, your heart will become cleansed." By polishing the deity's paraphernalia, he said, the devotees were cleaning their spiritual master's heart also. As he spoke, focusing simply and purely on devotion to the deity, the devotees suddenly realized the importance of this aspect of their Krishna consciousness. "Who has made these clothes?" Prabhupada asked, glancing at Radha and Krishna's little flounced dresses. "Sharadiya," a few devotees called out. Prabhupada smiled. "Thank you very much." Then he threw back his head and laughed. "Is Sharadiya still fighting with her husband?" The devotees and guests laughed, while Sharadiya covered her face with her hands. "Don't fight with your husband," Prabhupada said. "He is a good boy. Anybody that comes to Krishna consciousness is good." He then asked to see the rest of the house. 100 devotees, straining to see and hear Prabhupada's responses, followed him as he went downstairs. Although the crowd surrounded him, he remained relaxed and unhurried. He entered the press room, a long hall directly beneath the temple room. A large old offset press, a paper cutter, a folder, and flats of paper stock filled the room, which smelled like a print shop. Adwaita, the press manager, bowed down in his green khakis before Prabhupada. He rose up smiling, and Prabhupada stepped forward and embraced him, putting his arm around Adwaita's head. "Very good," he said. Standing before the printing press, Prabhupada folded his palms together and offered a prayer to his spiritual master. Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Adwaita asked Prabhupada to give the press a transcendental name. ISKCON Press, Prabhupada said matter-of-factly, as if it had already been named. "Keep all the machines very clean," Prabhupada said, "and they will last a long time. This is the heart of ISKCON." "You are the heart of ISKCON, Prabhupada," a devotee said. and this is my heart, said Prabhupada. Leaving the main press room, Prabhupada toured the other press facilities. Squeezing in, ducking under, standing on tiptoe, the crowd of devotees followed him step by step. He peeked into a little cubbyhole where a devotee was composing type. The typesetters, he said, should proceed very slowly at first, and in that way they would become expert. Turning to Advaita, he said, "Everyone in India who speaks Hindi has a Gita Press publication. So, everyone who speaks English should have an ISKCON Press publication." Compared to most authors, Prabhupada's literary contribution was already substantial. But he wasn't just an author. His mission was to flood the world with literature glorifying Lord Krishna. Prabhupada's ISKCON was now 3 years old, yet his disciples were only beginning to execute his plans for printing and distributing transcendental literature. Printing was an important step, the first step. Months ago, Prabhupada had written, quote, The press must work on continuously, and we shall produce immense volumes of literature. If the press goes on nicely, I shall be able to give you material for publishing a book every 2 months. We have got so much material for the Krishna consciousness movement. Unquote. And just prior to coming to Boston, he had written, quote, Sankirtan and distributing back to Godhead and our other literatures is the fieldwork of this movement. Temple worship is secondary, unquote. Now, ISKCON was printing 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead per month, and Prabhupada hoped to increase the sales more and more. Standing in the crowded, chilly basement surrounded by devotees, press machines, and transcendental literature, Prabhupada described how he wanted ISKCON Press to operate. He said that after dictating a tape, he would mail it to Boston to be transcribed. The transcription should take no more than 2 days. During the next 2 days, someone would edit the transcribed manuscript. Then another editor would take 2 days to edit the transcript a second time. A Sanskrit editor would add diacritical markings, and the manuscript would be ready for composing. Prabhupada said he could produce 15 tapes, 300 manuscript pages every month. At that rate, ISKCON Press should produce a book every 2 months, or 6 books in a year. Prabhupada wanted to print at least 60 books. Therefore, his press workers would have plenty to do for the next 10 years. If the devotees simply printed his books incessantly, he said, even if they had to work 24 hours a day in shifts, it would give him great delight. He was ready, if necessary, to drop all his activities, except for publishing books. This was the special nectar the press devotees were hankering to hear. Printing books was Prabhupada's heart. It was the thing most dear to him. During Prabhupada's week in Boston, Purushottam continued as secretary and servant out of duty. His difficulties in London had increased. Doubtful and morose, he came before Prabhupada 2 days before their departure. Purushottam, I had decided to leave in London. I just felt like there were different things I wanted to do. But I felt obligated to stay with him because he needed me there. It was my job to at least get him back to the States. I felt that he needed someone to travel with him, and I just felt that I should complete that, have everything in order, so I couldn't say to myself that I had just quit when he needed me like that in a foreign country. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't speak against him or anything. I performed my duties, but in my attitude I let him know I was really getting kind of distant the last few days. I didn't bow down to him. I would come in, but I just wouldn't bow down to him. He entered Prabhupada's room. He didn't bow down. He stood. He was too uncomfortable to sit because of the gravity of what he would say. Prabhupada looked up from his desk. Yes, Purushottama? Purushottama. I went in to see him. I knew I was going to leave, and it kind of made me sick to do it. Anyway, I told him I have a lot of questions about the movement, the moon, and everything. I just don't believe all of this. He was very congenial about the whole thing. He took it nicely. He said to me, if you have questions, why don't you ask me? And I said, you yourself have said that we should only ask questions to somebody. We should only ask questions to somebody we feel we can believe or trust. He looked very hurt. He knew what I was saying. I felt like I really hurt him. I didn't mean it to be so defiant, but there it was. He said, I've noticed that you haven't been well lately. You've had some problems? I said, well, I haven't been trying to hide it. I guess I was trying to prepare him for what was coming. I wanted to leave that night, so I said, I want to leave. But he said to me, you've been with me so long and now you're so anxious to go? You can't even stay a night? He said, why don't you stay at least till my plane leaves? That was 2 days later. I said, okay, I'll do that then. I was going to go back to New York. Actually, I didn't have the money for the ticket, and he gave me the money. He gave me the bus fare. I really appreciated that. I could have borrowed some money from someone else, but he said, well, you take it, and you can pay me back later. And I did. I gave it back the next week. He was very gracious about the whole thing. Actually, I could see that he had a very special loving way of looking at the world. I felt that sometimes I could see things in a loving way like he did, and I realized that I got that viewpoint from him. You know, that little loving spirit. He had that, and I kind of caught some of that from him, and that's one of the things I always remember about him. And I know that through his movement, I came to believe in God. Before I met him, I didn't believe in God. After Purushottama left, Prabhupada spoke with Bhavananda about Purushottama's doubts concerning the moon landing and his consequent doubts of Krishna consciousness. I can understand that he might not accept it because I said it, but how could he disbelieve the Vedic Shastras? Boston's weather was miserable. When the rain stopped, the snow fell, and when the snow stopped, the rain came again. Prabhupada tried taking a walk in the front yard, Bhavananda beside him with the umbrella, watching cautiously to guard him from falling on the ice. But after a week of Boston's nasty December weather, Prabhupada's cold was getting worse. He would go to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, February 25th, 1970. On the auspicious occasion of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's appearance day anniversary, the Los Angeles devotees received permission to enter their new temple on Watsika Avenue. The rooms had not even been cleaned, and the large hall was bare. But the devotees brought in Prabhupada's Vyasasan from the old temple on La Cienega, and Prabhupada had them place on it a large picture of his spiritual master. Standing before his spiritual master, Prabhupada offered arti, while some 50 disciples gathered around him, chanting Hare Krishna and dancing in the otherwise empty hall. After the arti, Prabhupada directed his disciples in offering flowers to the picture of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Then, still standing before the Vyasasan, he said he had nothing to offer his spiritual master on this day except his own disciples. He then read aloud the names of all his disciples. Taking his seat on a low Vyasasan beside the large Vyasasan of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada gave a short history of his Guru Maharaj, son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and powerful Acharya of the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Prabhupada gave a short history of his Guru Maharaj, son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and powerful Acharya of the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As Prabhupada recalled his first meeting with his spiritual master, he told how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had told him to teach Krishna consciousness to the English-speaking world. This large new temple, Prabhupada said, had been provided by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as a gift for the devotees to use in Krishna's service. They should not become attached to the opulence, Prabhupada said, but they should use this wonderful place for preaching. As he spoke, he wept. Now bring them prasadam, Prabhupada called. And the feast began. While devotees sat on the floor in rows, Prabhupada from his Vyasasan directed the servers, having them bring another samosa to one devotee, more chutney to another, and so on. He watched over all of them, encouraging them to take Krishna's prasadam. That afternoon, Prabhupada toured the buildings. In addition to the main hall, which he would have the devotees convert into a temple, he saw the equally large lecture hall. These rooms, plus a 3-room apartment, ample separate quarters for male and female devotees, a parking lot, and a front lawn, made this the finest physical facility in all of ISKCON. We don't require such a nice place for ourselves, Prabhupada told the temple president, Gargamuni. We are prepared to live anywhere. But such a nice place will give us opportunity to invite gentlemen to come and learn about this Krishna consciousness. The cost of the building had been $225,000 with a $50,000 down payment. Prabhupada had had more than $10,000 in his book fund, but that was exclusively for printing books. So although he usually didn't like to deal personally in such negotiations, he had made an exception in this case and had asked the other temples to donate to the New World headquarters in Los Angeles. He had even mailed snapshots of the buildings to various temple presidents around the world. Thus, he had collected the down payment, and on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's appearance day, ISKCON became the legal owner. This was the only temple ISKCON actually owned. All the other buildings were leased or rented, and Prabhupada wanted to design everything himself. Hiring professionals would be too expensive, but Prabhupada had plenty of disciples eager to do the renovation. Karandhara knew a little carpentry, plumbing, and general construction, and he could learn more by experience. Bhavananda had been a professional designer, and he was filled with Prabhupada's enthusiasm to transform the plain church into a dazzling palace for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. First you make my apartment, Prabhupada told Bhavananda. Let me move in, and then we will work on the temple room. Bhavananda. We picked out a part of the Los Angeles temple for Prabhupada's quarters, and Karandhara built a bathroom. When Prabhupada came up to the rooms, he said, "This will be my sitting room. This will be my bedroom." And when he came to a third room with a skylight, he said, "This will be my library." Prabhupada had told me once in Boston that as a child he had lived in a palace with blue walls, red marble floors, and orange and gold trim, the Mullick's house in Calcutta. So we painted the walls of his sitting room blue, and I put in a white tile floor. The drapes were burnt orange satin with gold cords and gold fringe. Prabhupada liked this color scheme very much. In the bedroom, I asked Prabhupada where he wanted his bed, and he said, "Put the bed in the middle of the room." We had put down a rug, and Prabhupada said, "Now you should get sheets and cover the rug with them." In India, they have rugs like this, nice rugs, and they cover them with sheets, and on special days they take the sheets off. Otherwise they would become ruined. So I went out and bought sheets. Prabhupada was in his sitting room when I came in and started putting the sheet over the rug in the bedroom. Prabhupada came in and said, "Yes, this is very nice. Again, I have introduced something new. This is something new for all of you. Sheets on rugs. Then he told me. Now, make sure there are no wrinkles in the sheet. I was on my hands and knees on the rug, and Prabhupada also got down on his hands and knees right next to me. We were both pressing out the wrinkles from the sheet, and when we got to the end, Prabhupada folded the sheet under the rug. He was very happy there because it was our own place. We had never had our own place before. In the temple room, Prabhupada showed Karandara where to build the 3 altars. He indicated the measurements and instructed that before each altar should be a pair of doors, and over them the symbols of Vishnu. A conch shell over the altar for Guru and Gauranga, a wheel and club over Radha and Krishna's altar in the center, and a lotus over Lord Jagannath. The spiritual master's Vyasa-san was to go at the opposite end of the temple, facing Radha and Krishna. The walls should be yellow, which Prabhupada said was in the mode of goodness. The ceiling should be covered with a canopy, and there should be chandeliers. Once the altars were completed, Prabhupada wanted to bring the deities, even though much of the renovation was yet unfinished. After constructing an umbrella-covered cart and decorating it with flowers, the devotees brought the deities in procession from the old temple on La Cienega Boulevard to their new home. Bhavananda. The first time he came into the temple room after his morning walk, he went to the Guru Gauranga altar and paid his obeisances. We all paid our obeisances. Then he stood up and he went to Radha and Krishna, and then paid obeisances, then to Jagannath, and we all followed. Then we walked back, and he sat on his Vyasa-san, and he told us, "Now you line up, facing each other, from the Vyasa-san to Radha and Krishna. Face each other. This way, that way. One way you look is Guru, and the other way God. And then back and forth that way. Always leave this aisle," he said, "so I can see." The deity was the king, Prabhupada said, and all the temple residents were his personal servants. The temple, therefore, should be like a palace. An elaborate temple was important for preaching, Prabhupada explained, because most people, especially Westerners, were not inclined to undergo any austerities for obtaining spiritual life. There was an Indian saying, "No one listens to a poor man." Were the devotees to advertise classes on bhakti yoga in such and such empty field under a certain tree, Prabhupada said no one would come. But a clean, beautiful building with chandeliers and comfortable rooms would attract many people to visit and become purified. The temple was also for those who wanted to live there as Krishna-conscious devotees. Devotees, Prabhupada said, should be willing to live and sleep anywhere. But as the loving, protecting father of his disciples, Prabhupada took great care to establish a large temple and an adequate dormitory facility. He was making a home for his family. To see that his spiritual children had a place to live and practice their devotional service was just another aspect of his mission. A special feature of the new temple was Srila Prabhupada's garden. The devotees had excavated a large patch of concrete behind the temple, filled it with earth, surrounded it with a cinder block wall, and planted a lawn with flower gardens all around. Karandara. I had dug some beds along the inside perimeter and planted a plant here and a plant there, but Prabhupada said, "No, plant something everywhere. Everywhere there should be something growing. Everywhere there is a place, you plant something. Let there be growing everywhere." He wanted it he wanted it overgrown like a jungle, a tropical area where plants just grow luxuriantly everywhere. Srila Prabhupada always enjoyed sitting in the garden in the evening with the fresh, cool evening air and the fragrance of the flowers. The topics of conversation in the garden were as varied as Srimad Bhagavatam, all different subjects. Sometimes there would be lively conversations with guests or devotees, and sometimes Prabhupada would spend the entire time just chanting, with very little conversation. Sometimes Prabhupada would just have somebody read from the Krishna book. Prabhupada said that his mother maintained a garden on the roof of their house when he was young, and that he would go up there in the evenings and play. He remembered that. He always remembered what he liked to do as a child. You would hear him reminisce with pleasure about it. Many times he would comment, "My mother maintained a garden on the roof of our residence, and as a child I would go there in the evening and play. Now I also have such a nice place to come." Under Prabhupada's personal direction, the Los Angeles Center became a model for the rest of ISKCON. At the morning Bhagavatam class, for example, he had the devotees responsively chant the Sanskrit mantras after him, and he asked that this become the standard program in all his temples. In May 1970, he wrote to each of his 26 temple presidents throughout North America and Europe, inviting them to visit him at Los Angeles. Quote, "Now at the present moment I am concentrating my energy in this Los Angeles Center as ideal for all other centers in respect to deity worship, artik, kirtan, and other necessary paraphernalia. As I have curtailed my moving program, I wish that you may come here at your convenience to stay here for a few days and see personally how things are going on, and by meeting with me personally for necessary instruction, I hope simultaneously in all centers the activities will be of the same standard." Unquote. The temple presidents who visited Prabhupada, most of them young men in their 20s, came with practical as well as philosophical questions. They came with their notebooks, writing down everything from the temple schedule to color schemes, noting the tunes used in the kirtans, learning how to manage a Sankirtan party, and perhaps most of all, they would note the things Prabhupada did and the words he spoke personally to them. The temple presidents would then return to their own centers, in Berkeley or Hamburg or Toronto or Sydney, glowing with ecstasy and ready to implement dozens of new standards they had imbibed from Prabhupada at the Los Angeles World Headquarters. Although Prabhupada still spoke of expanding his movement more and more, he seemed content to stay in Los Angeles, reaching the rest of the world through his temple presidents, his Sankirtan parties, and his books. New plans were unfolding, however, and Prabhupada again spoke of a governing body. 12 hand-picked disciples to manage all of ISKCON's affairs. He also spoke of initiating more sannyasis and taking them with him to India to train as itinerant preachers. And to ensure that his books were regularly and properly printed, he wanted to form a special committee in charge of book publication. Sometimes managing his worldwide religious movement, sometimes leading the growing group of devotees in chanting Sanskrit mantras in the Los Angeles temple, and sometimes sitting alone and translating in the pre-dawn hours, Prabhupada lived happily in Los Angeles. One day, a record arrived from London. The London devotees, who, with George Harrison's help, had already produced an album, had now also released a new single, Govinda. The song consisted of verses Prabhupada had taught them from Brahma Samhita, each verse ending with the refrain, Govindam Adipurisham Tamahang Bhajami. Prabhupada asked that the record be played during the morning program in the temple. The next morning, after he had entered the temple room, bowed down before the deity, and taken his seat on the Vyasasana to begin the class, the record began. Suddenly, Prabhupada became stunned with ecstasy. His body shivered and tears streamed from his eyes. The devotees, feeling a glimmer of their spiritual master's emotion, began to chant Hare Krishna as if chanting japa. The moments seemed to pass slowly. Finally, Prabhupada spoke. Govindam Adipurusham tam ahang bhajami. He was again silent. Then he asked, Is everyone all right? The response was a huge roar, Jai Prabhupada, and he began the Srimad Bhagavatam class. Vaishnavera kriya mudra vigena bujhaya. No one can understand the mind of a Vaishnava. Only a pure devotee can understand another pure devotee perfectly. But by observing the main activities of Prabhupada's life, we can see that whatever he did was pure service to Lord Krishna and was a perfect example of how to surrender to Krishna. He taught by precept and by example. Often encouraging, even praising his disciples, he always pushed them into more and more participation in the blissful Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya. But he also exposed the faults of his disciples, and these faults were sometimes great and painful to see, both for him and for his disciples. One day, as Prabhupada came into his quarters at the Los Angeles temple, he saw that one of the devotees cleaning his room had placed his picture upside down, a simple mistake. But it indicated something wrong in the disciples' mentality. Every morning, the devotees sing prayers to the spiritual master, honoring him as the direct representative of God. How could any sincere disciple not notice that he is standing's God representative upside down? Then a more serious discrepancy. Prabhupada went to the temple, greeted the deities, and went to take Charanamrita, the scented water from the bathing of the deities. It was part of his daily schedule. After his morning walk, he would return to the temple and offer obeisances to the deities while the Govinda record was being played. A devotee would then offer him a few drops of Charanamrita in his right palm, and he would sip it. He had mentioned this item of devotional service in the Nectar of Devotion. Scented with perfumes and flowers, the water comes gliding down through his lotus feet and is collected and mixed with yogurt. In this way, the Charanamrita not only becomes very tastefully flavored, but also has tremendous spiritual value. Ellipses. The devotees who come to visit and offer respects to the deity take 3 drops of Charanamrita very submissively and feel themselves happy in transcendental bliss. On this particular morning, however, as Srila Prabhupada took Charanamrita, he frowned. Someone had put salt in it. He walked the length of the temple room, took his seat on the Vyasasan, and before a room full of 100 devotees asked, "Who has put salt in the Charanamrita?" A young girl in a sari stood, and with a nervous smile, she said she had done it. "Why have you done it?" Prabhupada asked gravely. "I don't know," she giggled. Prabhupada turned to Gargamuni. "Get someone responsible." Everyone present felt Prabhupada's anger. The unpleasant moment marred the pure temple atmosphere. A disciple worships Krishna by pleasing Krishna's representative, the spiritual master. Therefore, to displease the spiritual master was a spiritual disqualification. The spiritual master was not merely a principle. He was a person, Srila Prabhupada. When ISKCON Press in Boston misprinted Prabhupada's name on a new book, he became deeply disturbed. The small paperback chapter from the 2nd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam bore his name on the cover as simply A.C. Bhaktivedanta. Omitted was the customary His Divine Grace as well as Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada's name stood almost divested of spiritual significance. Another ISKCON Press publication, described Prabhupada as Acharya of ISKCON, although Prabhupada had repeatedly emphasized that he was the founder Acharya. There had been many Acharyas, or spiritual masters, and there would be many more, but His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada was the sole founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. To make matters worse, when Prabhupada first opened the new Bhagavatam chapter, the binding cracked and the pages fell out. Prabhupada glowered. The devotees in Boston, hearing of Prabhupada's anger, knew at once that their mistake in misprinting Srila Prabhupada's name was a serious oversight. Minimizing the spiritual master's position was a grave offense, and they had even published the offense. The serious implications were difficult for the devotees to face, and they knew they would have to rectify their mentality before they could make spiritual progress. Prabhupada criticized the mentality behind these mistakes, and his criticisms were instructive to his disciples. Unless he instructed them about the absolute position of the spiritual master, how would they learn? At the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam class one morning, Prabhupada called on one of the women devotees. Nandarani, she stood respectfully. Do you chant 16 rounds every day? Well, I try to, Prabhupada. This is the problem, Prabhupada said, turning to the temple president. If Nandarani, one of the senior responsible women, wasn't chanting regularly, then certainly the new women under her weren't either. This was the manager's fault. Prabhupada had praised and encouraged his disciples for laboring hard to renovate the temple and for going out daily into the streets to chant and distribute magazines. But for a devotee to not chant the prescribed rounds was to neglect the most important instruction. What Nandarani hadn't said was that the temple authorities had told her that chanting all her 16 rounds wasn't necessary as long as she worked. They had told her this even though Prabhupada clearly instructed his disciples at initiation to always chant at least 16 rounds daily. Then another incident. During the morning class, Prabhupada was discussing Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, an associate of Lord Chaitanya. Looking among the devotees, he asked, "Who can tell me who is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya?" No one spoke. Prabhupada waited. "None of you can tell me who is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya?" he asked. One girl raised her hand. She had read something about him. That was all. "Aren't you ashamed?" Prabhupada looked at the men. "You should be the leaders. If the men cannot advance, then the women cannot advance. You must be Brahmins. Then your wives will be Brahmins. But if you are not Brahmins, then what can they do? Without improving their chanting and without reading Krishna conscious literature, Prabhupada said, they would never attain the purity necessary for preaching Lord Chaitanya's message." While the local anomalies were weighing heavily on Srila Prabhupada, he learned of strange things his disciples in India had written in their letters, and he became more disturbed. One letter to devotees in America reported that Prabhupada's godbrothers in India objected to his title, Prabhupada. According to them, only Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati should be called Prabhupada, and they referred to Prabhupada as Swami Maharaj. Prabhupada also learned that some of his disciples were saying he was not the only spiritual master. They were interested in reading Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's books as if to discover some new teaching Prabhupada had not yet revealed. Prabhupada regarded these remarks as dangerous for ISKCON. Advancement in spiritual life was based on implicit faith in the spiritual master, and to Prabhupada these new ideas indicated a relative conception, as opposed to the absolute conception of the spiritual master. Such a conception could destroy all he had established. At least, it could destroy the spiritual life of anyone who held it. Though sometimes ignorant, his disciples, he knew, were not malicious. Yet these letters from India carried a spiritual disease transmitted by several of Prabhupada's godbrothers to his disciples there. Prabhupada had already been troubled when some of his godbrothers had refused to help him secure land in Mayapur, the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. Although he had asked them to help his inexperienced disciples purchase land, they had not complied. In fact, some of them had worked against him. Prabhupada had written to one of his godbrothers, "I am so sorry to learn that there is a sort of conspiracy by some of our godbrothers as not to give me a place at Mayapur." Prabhupada was sensitive to any threat to ISKCON. His accepting the name Prabhupada, his teaching that the disciple must approach the spiritual master as the direct representative of Krishna, without attempting to jump over him to the previous spiritual masters, these things he had carefully explained to his disciples. But now a few irresponsibly spoken remarks in India were weakening the faith of some of his disciples. Perhaps this insidious contamination that was now spreading had precipitated the blunders at ISKCON Press and even the discrepancies in Los Angeles. Talks about the relative position of the spiritual master could only be the workings of Maya, the Lord's illusory energy. Maya was attempting to bewilder the devotees of ISKCON. That was her job, to lead the conditioned souls away from Krishna's service. The recent events began to hamper Prabhupada's writing. He had been working quickly in Los Angeles and had recently finished the second and final volume of Krishna. And on the very tape on which he had dictated the last chapter of Krishna, he had immediately begun a summary of the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Gradually, however, his writing stopped. Karandara. Prabhupada's translating would require a great deal of concentration. He would have 2 or 3 of his big Bhagavatam volumes opened up, and sometimes a number of other small books, which he would refer to for something or other. He would sit wearing his glasses and speaking into his dictating machine, and he would be completely absorbed in reading. Sometimes he would make a brief note, then look into one of his books, then open another book, turn back to another page, make a note, and then dictate. It required a great deal of concentration. I think that's why Prabhupada did most of it at night after he would rise from his late evening nap. From 1 or 2 in the morning until 6 or 7 in the morning, he would be absorbed. It was quiet at that time, and he could become absorbed. But when Prabhupada became disturbed about the problems in ISKCON, it inhibited his work. He was spending his time discussing with visiting devotees, or myself, or whoever was there. Then he would spend more time thinking matters over, or pondering the problem, and he wouldn't be able to concentrate on his translating. These difficulties disturbed him, and he would think about them and say, "I have not been able to concentrate. I have been thinking about this problem." Although the spiritual master suffers for his disciples' mistakes, Prabhupada's perspective was not simply negative. He continued chanting and lecturing in the temple and inviting the leaders of his movement to visit him in the ideal center of Los Angeles. But he also corrected the diseased mentality wherever it appeared. When, for example, Guru Das wrote from London to say that they had allowed an Indian guest to lecture in the temple while sitting on Prabhupada's Vyasasan, Prabhupada immediately wrote back correcting him, quote, "I am surprised how you allowed Mr. Parikh to sit on the Vyasasan. You know that Vyasasan is meant for the representative of Vyasadeva, the spiritual master. But Mr. Parikh does not come in the parampara to become the representative of Vyas. Neither does he have any sound knowledge of Vaishnava principles. I understand from your letter that sometimes discussions on Aurobindo philosophy are done by Mr. Parikh from the Vyasasan. So I am a little surprised. How did you allow like this? I think you should rectify immediately all these mistakes, as stated by you in the last 2 lines of your letter. Quote, I think the best thing to do is to stop his class. Nonsense ought not to be tolerated, unquote, unquote. In a letter from Paris, Tamal Krishna asked Prabhupada philosophical questions about the perfection of the spiritual master, and Prabhupada answered fully but sternly. Quote, a spiritual master is always liberated. In any condition of his life, he should not be mistaken as an ordinary human being. This position of the spiritual master is achieved by 3 processes. One is called sadhan siddha. That means one who is liberated by executing the regulative principles of devotional service. Another is kripa siddha, one who is liberated by the mercy of Krishna or his devotee. And another is nitya siddha, who is never forgetful of Krishna throughout his whole life. These are the 3 features of the perfection of life. So far, Narada Muni is concerned, in his previous life he was a maidservant's son, but by the mercy of the devotee he later on became Siddha. And next life, he appeared as Narada with complete freedom to move anywhere by the grace of the Lord. So, even though he was in his previous life a maidservant's son, there was no impediment in the achievement of his perfect spiritual life. Similarly, any living entity who is conditioned can achieve the perfectional stage of life by the above-mentioned processes, and the vivid example is Narada Muni. So, I do not know why you have asked about my previous life, whether I was subjected to the laws of material nature. So even though accepting that I was subjected to the laws of material nature, does it hamper in my becoming spiritual master? What is your opinion? From the life of Narada Muni, it is distinct that although he was a conditioned soul in his previous life, there was no impediment of his becoming the spiritual master. This law is applicable not only to the spiritual master, but to every living entity. So far as I am concerned, I cannot say what it was in my previous life. But one great astrologer calculated that I was previously a physician and my life was sinless. Besides that, to corroborate the statement of Bhagavad Gita, Suchinam Srimatam Gehe Yoga Brahsta Bijate, which means an unfinished yogi takes birth in rich family or born of a suchi or pious father. By the grace of Krishna, I got these 2 opportunities in the present life to be born of a pious father and brought up in one of the richest aristocratic families of Calcutta, Kasinatha Mullock. The Radha Krishna deity in this family called me to meet him, and therefore, last time when I was in Calcutta, I stayed in that temple along with my American disciples. Although I had immense opportunities to indulge in the 4 principles of sinful life, because I was connected with a very aristocratic family, Krishna always saved me, and throughout my whole life, I do not know what is illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, or gambling. So far my present life is concerned, I do not remember any part of my life when I was forgetful of Krishna, unquote. Prabhupada thought some of his leaders had become entangled in ISKCON management and were trying to gain control for themselves. In the classes, he would speak of this only indirectly, as he had when he had exposed that the devotees weren't chanting and reading enough. Consequently, most devotees were unaware of Prabhupada's anxiety. But occasionally, while sitting in his room or in the garden, Prabhupada would express his concern. He wanted his disciples to manage ISKCON, but to do so they must be pure. Only then would he be able to concentrate on writing books. In June, he wrote to Brahmananda, quote, "Now, my desire is that I completely devote my time in the matter of writing and translating books, and arrangement should now be done so that our society be managed automatically. I think we should have a central governing body for dealing with important matters. I have already talked with Gargamuni about this. So, if you come back by the Rath Yatra festival, we can have a preliminary meeting at San Francisco in this connection." Unquote. In July, Prabhupada visited San Francisco for the 4th annual ISKCON Rath Yatra. It was the biggest festival ever, with 10,000 people joining in the procession through Golden Gate Park to the beach. Prabhupada felt ill and didn't join the parade until about midway. He danced in the road before the carts as 100 disciples encircled him, chanting and playing kartals and mridangas. Afterward, Prabhupada wanted to ride in the cart, just as he had done the year before, but some of his disciples restrained him. A gang of hoodlums, they said, had caused trouble earlier, and for Prabhupada to ride on the cart might be dangerous. He disagreed, but finally relented and rode in his car to the beach. At the Family Dog Auditorium on the beach, Prabhupada began his lecture. "I want to thank you all for coming. Although I am not well, I felt it my responsibility to come, as you have so kindly attended Lord Jagannath's Rath Yatra festival. I felt it my duty to come and see you and address you." His voice was frail. Later, in his apartment in San Francisco, Prabhupada complained that he had not been allowed to ride in the cart. As leader of the Hare Krishna movement, he should have ridden on the cart. Not only had his disciples refused him, but several disciples had prominently ridden on the cart as if in his place. Prabhupada asked the many temple presidents assembled for the Rath Yatra to meet and discuss forming a governing body to manage ISKCON. The devotees met and then reported that they thought only one of them should be elected the chief representative. They hadn't understood. The strength should be in a group, Prabhupada said, not in a single individual. Since he was ISKCON's founder Acharya, what need was there for another single leader? He asked them to meet again. Returning to Los Angeles, Prabhupada announced he would award several of his disciples the sannyas order. The devotee community excitedly prepared for the festival. The sannyasis, Prabhupada said, would leave their temples to travel and preach. It was an unprecedented change for ISKCON, a sensation, and the devotees loved it. Although Prabhupada was awarding sannyas to some of his most advanced disciples, he also said the sannyas initiation was to purify these disciples and rid them of their entanglement in material desires. He set the initiation for the end of July, 2 weeks later. One day in Los Angeles, a visiting devotee speaking with Prabhupada in his room humbly asked why Prabhupada hadn't answered his questions in a recent letter. Prabhupada remembered no such letter. Inquiring from his secretary, Prabhupada discovered that his secretary often showed incoming letters to certain temple leaders who at their discretion would sometimes withhold letters they considered petty or too disturbing. Prabhupada was outraged. How dare they come between him and his other disciples? How could they presume to make such decisions on their own? How could a disciple censor his spiritual master's mail? Although Prabhupada reprimanded the devotees involved, the incident only increased the already heavy burden on his mind. Again, the thought of spiritual disease transmitted in letters from India disturbed him. He found no one close to him in Los Angeles with whom he could speak confidentially about this serious minimization of the spiritual master. As his anxiety affected him bodily, he fell ill and stopped eating. Karandara. I'd heard some things, but in the spirit of going on, it had all been glossed over, and Prabhupada didn't talk much about it either. One time, though, I was in his room right after the sannyasis had left Los Angeles, and he asked me if I understood what had gone on. I said, well, I think so, but I didn't really know very much. At that time, the devotees who were going out on Sankirtan were in the alleyway chanting, and Prabhupada was at his desk. Hearing the kirtan, he turned back, looking in the direction of the devotees below his window, and smiled. Then he turned to me. They're innocent, he said. Do not involve them in this business. Karantara still didn't understand, and he wondered what not to involve them in. He didn't know, however, that a shadow was hanging over the heads of the sannyasis. Prabhupada requested 3 trusted disciples to come be with him in Los Angeles. Rupanuga. I was in Buffalo and the phone rang. Someone said, Srila Prabhupada is on the telephone. I said, what? You're kidding. It wasn't Srila Prabhupada, but it was his servant, Devananda. Devananda said, Srila Prabhupada wants you to come to Los Angeles. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, he doesn't want... Then he said, Srila Prabhupada wants to talk about it now. So Srila Prabhupada got on the phone, and as soon as I heard him on the line, I paid my obeisances. Then I said, Srila Prabhupada, what's wrong? He said, you didn't know I was ill? I said, no. He said, you should come immediately. Then I said, Srila Prabhupada, let me speak to Devananda. I didn't know what was going on. So I asked Devananda, tell me what's going on. Then he said, Srila Prabhupada said he will talk with you when you come. He will explain everything. Bhagavan Das. One day after coming back from Sankirtan, I received a call from Rupanuga, who told me he was on his way to Los Angeles, having received a call from Prabhupada that there was some disturbance there. He couldn't tell me more, but he said he would call me when he returned. This set my mind reeling. I sat in the chair, hot and sweaty after coming back from Sankirtan, my mind absorbed in thinking of Prabhupada and what could be going on. I called Los Angeles to talk to Prabhupada's secretary, Devananda, who told me he couldn't really say anything at that point. I was hoping somehow or other I would get more information of the situation, but after waiting some time, I went in to take my shower. I was in the shower when all of a sudden someone banged on the door. Prabhupada's on the telephone. He wants to speak with you. I was sure there was some misunderstanding. How is it possible that the spiritual master could be on the telephone? Anyway, I ran out of the shower all wet and picked up the telephone and said, hello? There was a long pause. Then all of a sudden I heard Srila Prabhupada's voice on the other end. Bhagavan Das? Yes, I said, Srila Prabhupada, please accept my humble obeisances. How can I serve you? I was completely stunned. Then Prabhupada's voice came slowly on the phone. There are many things that you will do, but the first thing is that you must come here immediately. I said, of course, Srila Prabhupada, I will be there right away. And with that, we both hung up. I managed to gather the money together to take the flight to Los Angeles. And when I got on the plane in Detroit, it just so happened that Rupanuga was also on the same plane. We sat together and discussed what could possibly be happening in Los Angeles to cause Srila Prabhupada so much distress. When we arrived at the airport, Karantara picked us up and told us that some of the older devotees had been plotting against Prabhupada, and that day Prabhupada had given several of the men sannyas and sent them away to preach. This was all quite amazing to me, and I didn't really know what to make of it. When we came into Prabhupada's room, he looked distressed and was rubbing his head, complaining of the blood pressure that was caused by the conspiracy. Tamal Krishna. I had written Srila Prabhupada a lengthy letter from Paris describing how we wanted to expand our preaching efforts in Europe, and suddenly I received a telegram from His Divine Grace that said, Received your letter 26 July. Come Los Angeles immediately. I was quite surprised, and I remembered disentangling myself that very day and leaving that night, even though I was in charge of the activities there. When I arrived in Los Angeles, I found Rupanuga, Bhagavan, Kirtanananda Swami, and Karantara. I was in a very enthusiastic, blissful mood from having done so much Sankirtan, and I had no idea of any difficulty. But these devotees were all in a heavy, sober, somber mood, and they tried to explain to me what was going on, but actually I could not get a very clear understanding. I had arrived in the late afternoon, and I could not see Srila Prabhupada. Early the next morning, when Prabhupada was informed that I had arrived, he called for me before Mangalarti. I went up to his quarters, and when I came through the door, Prabhupada was sitting in his room with his head downward. He looked up, and he appeared to be almost ill. He was gaunt and looked very sorrowful. He said meekly, just as I was bowing down, "Have they told you?" Of course, I hadn't really understood everything, but in reply to his question, I said, "Yes, they have told me some things." And Prabhupada said, "Can you help me?" So I answered, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." He said, "Can you take me out of here?" I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." Of course, I didn't feel that I could help Srila Prabhupada, but I could understand that I had to say yes. How can you say no? How can you say, "No, I won't"? But how far could I help? It's like lifting the heaviest object in the world. The Guru is so heavy, and yet I had to say yes. So Prabhupada asked me next, "Where will you take me?" And I said, "Well, we can go to Florida." He said, "No, that is not far enough." I said, "I could take you to Europe." He said, "No, that also will not be good. The problem may be there also." So anyway, we didn't conclude where to go at that time. But Prabhupada said, "It is like a fire here. I must leave at once. It has become like a fire." Prabhupada confided in Rupanuga, Tamal Krishna, and Bhagavan about the various incidents: his mail withheld, his name misprinted, his riding in the Rath Yatra parade restricted. He mentioned these and other indications that certain persons wanted to move him into the background, out of the reach of his disciples. He didn't want to stay in Los Angeles. He didn't want to stay in the United States. He didn't even want to go to Europe. He wanted to leave the arena of his disciples' offenses. But before leaving, he wanted to complete his plans for establishing a governing body to manage ISKCON. To this end, he dictated the following on July 28th, quote, "I, the undersigned, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, disciple of Om Vishnupad Paramahansa 108 Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada, came in the United States in 1965 on September 18th for the purpose of starting Krishna consciousness movement. For 1 year, I had no shelter. I was traveling in many parts of this country. Then, in 1966, July, I incorporated this society under the name and style, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, briefly ISKCON. Ellipses. Gradually, the society increased, and one after another branches were opened. Now we have got 34, number 34, branches enlisted herewith. As we have increased our volume of activities, now I think a governing body commission, hereinafter referred to as the GBC, should be established. I am getting old, 75 years old. Therefore, at any time, I may be out of the scene. Therefore, I think it is necessary to give instruction to my disciples how they shall manage the whole institution. They are already managing individual centers represented by one president, one secretary, and one treasurer. And in my opinion, they are doing nice. But we want still more improvement in the standard of temple management, propaganda for Krishna consciousness, distribution of books and literatures, opening of new centers, and educating devotees to the right standard. Therefore, I have decided to adopt the following principles, and I hope my beloved disciples will kindly accept them." Unquote. Prabhupada then listed the names of the 12 persons who would form the GBC. Number 1, Sriman Rupanuga Das Adhikari. Number 2, Sriman Bhagavan Das Adhikari. Number 3, Sriman Shyamasundar Das Adhikari. Number 4, Sriman Satsvarup Das Adhikari. Number 5, Sriman Karandhar Das Adhikari. Number 6, Sriman Hansaduda Das Adhikari. Number 7, Sriman Tamal Krishna Das Adhikari. Number 8, Sriman Sudam Das or Sudama. Number 8, Sriman Sudama Das Adhikari. Number 9, Sriman Bali Mardan Das Brahmachari. Number 10, Sriman Jagadish Das Adhikari. Number 11, Sriman Hayagriva Das Adhikari. Number 12, Sriman Krishna Das Adhikari. Quote, these personalities are now considered as my direct representatives. While I am living, they will act as my zonal secretaries, and after my demise, they will be known as executors. Unquote. Prabhupada further described the role of the sannyasis. Quote, I have already awarded sannyas, or the renounced order of life, to some of my students, and they have also got very important duties to perform in this connection. The sannyasis will travel to our different centers for preaching, purpose, as well as enlightening the members of the center for spiritual advancement. Unquote. Prabhupada's legal document went on to set forth general directions for the GBC secretaries. They should travel regularly to the temples in their respective zones to ensure that each devotee chanted 16 rounds and followed a regulated schedule, and that the temples were clean. His 12 GBC secretaries would relieve him of management, and they would rectify present and future difficulties within the society. That rectification, Prabhupada's document explained, would be possible only when the devotees in each temple engaged fully in regulated devotional service, rising early for Mangal Arti at 4:30, attending Srimad Bhagavatam class and reciting the Sanskrit verses, and chanting in the streets and distributing Back to Godhead magazines and other Krishna-conscious literature. This emphasis on strictly following Krishna-conscious principles would supersede all material formulas for management. The GBC would ensure that in their appointed zones all the devotees were properly engaged. There would be no Maya. The next day, Prabhupada drafted another significant statement, naming Bhagavan, Rupanuga, and Karandara trustees of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. Quote, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust account will be used to publish my books and literature and to establish temples throughout the world. Specifically, 3 temples are to be established, one each in Mayapur, Vrindavan, and Jagannath Puri. Unquote. Since returning to America in 1967, Prabhupada had often said he would stay permanently in America as the adopted son of his disciples. Now he revealed new plans. He spoke of going to India to preach and to establish large ISKCON temples. For the devotees who based their activities mostly in small rented houses, Prabhupada's constructing cathedral-like buildings in India was inconceivable. In India, Prabhupada said, he would teach his disciples how to preach and how to establish temples. Prabhupada picked a team, including 2 newly initiated sannyasis, to accompany him to India. In the future, he said, more disciples could join him, for India would become an important field for Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada wrote Satsvarup and Uddhava in Boston. Quote, you are all my children, and I love my American boys and girls, who are sent to me by my spiritual master, and I have accepted them as my disciples. Before coming to your country, I took sannyas in 1959. I was publishing BTG since 1944. After taking sannyas, I was more engaged in writing my books without any attempt to construct temples or to make disciples like my other godbrothers in India. I was not very much interested in these matters because my Guru Maharaj liked very much publication of books than constructing big temples and creating some neophyte disciples. As soon as he saw that his neophyte disciples were increasing in number, he immediately decided to leave this world. To accept disciples means to take up the responsibility of absorbing the sinful reaction of life of the disciple. At the present moment in our ISKCON campus, politics and diplomacy has entered. Some of my beloved students, on whom I counted very much, have been involved in this matter, influenced by Maya. As such, there has been some activity which I consider as disrespectful. So I have decided to retire and divert attention to book writing and nothing more." Unquote. On July 31st, Prabhupada wrote Brahmananda and Gargamuni explaining why he was leaving for India. Quote, "In order to set example to my other sannyasi students, I am personally going to Japan with a party of 3 other sannyasi students. Although it is beyond my physical condition, still I am going out so that you may learn the responsibility of sannyas." Ellipses. "I am fervently appealing to you all not to create fracture in the solid body of the society. Please work conjointly, without any personal ambition. That will help the cause. It is the injunction of the Vedas that the spiritual master should not be treated as ordinary man. Even sometimes the spiritual master behaves like ordinary man. It is the duty of the disciple to accept him as a superhuman man. In the beginning of your letter, your comparison of the soldier and the commander is very appropriate. We are on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, one side Maya, the other side Krishna. So the regulative principles of a battlefield, namely to abide by the order of the commander, must be followed. Otherwise, it is impossible to direct the fighting capacity of the soldiers and thus defeat the opposing elements. Kindly therefore take courage. Let things be rightly done, so that our mission may be correctly pushed forward to come out victorious." Unquote. Prabhupada wrote other letters revealing his plans to travel to India. Quote, "Our life is very short. The Krishna consciousness movement is not meant for fulfilling one's personal ambition, but it is a serious movement for the whole world. I am therefore going to the Eastern Hemisphere, beginning from Japan. We are going 4 in a party, and all of us are sannyasis. In this old age, I am going with this party just to set an example to my disciples who have taken recently the sannyas order." Unquote. In preparation for Prabhupada's trip to India, Prabhupada's secretary, Devananda, now Devananda Swami, asked him questions from the immigration form, mechanically reading the questions and filling in the answers as Prabhupada replied. "Have you ever committed any criminal acts?" Devananda asked, reading from the form. Prabhupada's eyes widened. "You're asking your spiritual master if he did anything criminal?" And he turned to Bhagavan. "You see, I am simply surrounded by people I cannot trust. It is a dangerous situation." Prabhupada sat in his garden the night before his departure. "Don't be disturbed," he told the disciples with him. "We are not going backward. We are going forward. I will reveal everything to you. I will rectify." His strong words and criticisms, he said, had been to enlighten his disciples, to warn them and show them the subtleties of Maya. Karantara mentioned that the temple leaders had arranged that only a few devotees go with Prabhupada the next day to the airport. "Where did this idea come from?" Prabhupada asked. "Srimad Bhagavatam instructs that when a saintly person leaves your company, all present should follow the departing vehicle as far as possible until it is out of sight." So the next day, the devotees all accompanied Prabhupada, chanting and dancing behind him through the long corridors of Los Angeles International Airport. After many months with them, he was now leaving. Devotees cried. Prabhupada, dressed in new garments, his head freshly shaven, looked effulgent. He sat in the departure lounge, head held high, as grave and unfathomable as ever. He was embarking on a new adventure for Lord Chaitanya. He was old and might not return, he said, but his disciples should continue the Krishna consciousness movement seriously. If you follow this new schedule, he said, you will keep Maya from attacking. And then he left them. En route to Japan, Prabhupada stopped overnight in Hawaii. He stayed in a motel, and Gaurasundar and Govindadasi came to talk with him. Govindadasi wanted Prabhupada to stay and install their deities of Radha and Krishna in the temple. If Gaurasundar agreed, Prabhupada said he would stay a few days longer to perform the deity installation. Let me consult, Gaurasundar replied, and the next day, Prabhupada flew on to Japan. From Japan, Prabhupada wrote Govindadasi, quote, "It is very encouraging to learn that people inquired about me and were eager to hear my speaking. I could have stayed 1 or 2 more days. There was no hurry, but you did not make any arrangement. I personally proposed to Gaurasundar that I shall install the deities, and he replied that, let me consult. But he never informed me of the result, and that consultation, and with whom he had to consult. So this is the present situation of our ISKCON society. It is clear that a great mischievous propaganda was lightly made, and the effect has created a very unfavorable situation, and I am very much afflicted in this connection. Still, there is time to save the society out of this mischievous propaganda, and I hope all of you combine together to do the needful." Unquote. At the Tokyo airport, Prabhupada was greeted by executives of Dai Nippon Printing Company, the printers of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the 20,000 monthly copies of Back to Godhead. Prabhupada and his entourage rode in a limousine, courtesy of Dai Nippon, to a small private apartment about 45 minutes from the temple. Prabhupada had developed a severe cough and several other symptoms of ill health due, he said, to his disciples' behavior. Yet, despite his illness, he would talk for hours of his concern for ISKCON, especially with his traveling GBC secretary Tamal Krishna. Soon after their arrival in Japan, Prabhupada's secretary received a disturbing call from a devotee attending the society-wide Janmashtami celebration at New Vrindavan. 4 of the newly initiated sannyasis had arrived, the devotee said, and were teaching a strange philosophy. Devotees were confused. Prabhupada had left America, the sannyasis were saying, because he had rejected his disciples. The sannyasis were blaming themselves and other disciples for not realizing that Prabhupada was actually Krishna. When Prabhupada heard this, he said, "That is why I did not go. I knew this would happen. This is impersonalism." He defined the Mayavad, impersonal misconception of the Guru and Krishna. If one says that the Guru is God, or if the Guru himself says that he is God, that is Mayavad philosophy. For the Mayavadis, spiritual realization is realization of one's identity with Brahman, the all-pervading spirit. Despite their austerities and their detachment from materialistic society, and despite their study of Vedanta Sutra and the commentaries of Shankara, they mistakenly think that Krishna's body, name, pastimes, service, and devotees are all facets of Maya, or illusion. Therefore, they are called Mayavadis. A Mayavad spiritual master does not reveal to his disciple the holy name of Krishna, the holy pastimes of Krishna, or the transcendental form of Krishna, since the Mayavadi considers all these Maya. Instead, the Guru explains the oneness of all things, teaching the disciple that the concept of separate existence and ego is illusion. The Mayavadis sometimes compare the Guru to a ladder. One uses the ladder to reach a higher position, but if the ladder is no longer needed, one kicks it away. Coughing intermittently and speaking with physical discomfort, Prabhupada explained the Mayavadis' dangerous misconceptions. The impersonalists held a cheap, mundane view of the Guru's worship, and the Guru's instructions. If one says that the Guru is God and God is not a person, then it follows logically that the Guru has no eternal personal relationship with his disciples. Ultimately, the disciple will become equal to the Guru, or in other words, he will realize that he too is God. Arguing from the Vedic scripture, Prabhupada refuted the Mayavadi's claims. The individual souls, he said, are Krishna's eternal servants, and this master-servant relationship is eternal. Service to Krishna, therefore, is spiritual activity. Only by serving the Guru, however, can a disciple fully revive his eternal relationship with Krishna. The Vedic literature gives paramount importance to serving the spiritual master. He is the representative of God, the direct, manifest link to God. No one can approach God but through him. Lord Krishna says, "Those who are directly my devotees are actually not my devotees, but those who are devotees of my servant, the spiritual master, are factually my devotees." For hours, Prabhupada drilled his disciples. He would pose a Mayavad argument, then ask his disciples to defeat it. If they failed, he would defeat it himself. He stressed that the relationship between the spiritual master and disciple was eternal, not because the Guru was Krishna, but because he was the confidential servant of Krishna eternally. A bona fide spiritual master never says that he is Krishna, or that Krishna is impersonal. The devotees began to understand how the offenses of minimizing Srila Prabhupada's position were products of Mayavad philosophy. For the Mayavadi, to increase devotion to the Guru is unnecessary. If individual relationships are all ultimately illusion, why increase the illusion? If the master-servant relationship is ultimately illusion, then the less the disciple sees his Guru as master and himself as servant, the more he is advancing. The Mayavad philosophy was a subtle and insidious poison. At least Prabhupada had been spared the pain of being personally present in New Vrindavan to witness the Mayavad rantings of certain of his disciples and the appalling display of ignorance of most of the others. He had his small entourage and was on his way to preach in India. While here in Tokyo, he would try to obtain many Back to Godhead magazines and Krishna books to take with him. Prabhupada observed Janmashtami at his apartment by having disciples read aloud to him from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, throughout the day. If they kept reading, he said, they might be able to finish the book in one day. The devotees had decorated Prabhupada's room with leaves and flowers, strung from the ceiling and along the walls, and Prabhupada sat on a thin mattress behind his low desk, hearing the pastimes of Krishna. At 9 p.m., after fasting all day, the devotees were still reading to him when he asked if they would be able to finish the book by midnight. The devotees replied that they would not. "Then you stop and I will read." Prabhupada opened a Sanskrit volume of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam and for the next 2 hours chanted the Sanskrit verses. "You cannot understand the Sanskrit," he said, "but I know you can feel. The verses are so potent that just by hearing one can be purified." During the reading, Kirtanananda Swami and Kartikeya Swami cooked a feast in the kitchen. At midnight, the devotees served Srila Prabhupada the Janmashtami feast. Taking only a few bites, he watched the disciples eat heartily. The next day was Vyasa Puja, Prabhupada's 74th birthday, and he went to the Tokyo ISKCON temple. The temple was only 2 rooms, one for living, one for worshipping, with Japanese grass mats on the floor. Prabhupada sat to the right of the altar, looking at Lord Jagannath while his disciples sat on the floor before him, singing Guruvashtika prayers, glorifying the spiritual master. None of them, however, knew exactly how to conduct the Vyasa Puja ceremony, and after a while, they ended the kirtan. In the painfully awkward moments that followed, the devotees realized they were supposed to do something special, but what? Prabhupada appeared angry. "Don't you have Pushpa Yatra? Isn't prasadam ready?" The devotees looked at one another. "This is not Vyasa Puja," Prabhupada said. "You have not been to Vyasa Puja before? Don't you know how to celebrate the Vyasa Puja? how to honor the spiritual master? One of the sannyasis began to cry. Tamal Krishna, Prabhupada said, didn't you see how I observed my Guru Maharaj's birthday? Where is Pushpa? Pushpa is Sanskrit for flowers. Pushpa, Pushpa. Tamal Krishna decided Prabhupada must mean Pushpana, a fancy rice dish. I'm not sure, he said. What kind of Vyasa Puja is this with no Pushpa? Prabhupada asked. We can get some, Prabhupada, Tamal Krishna offered. Tamal Krishna grabbed Sudama. Prabhupada wants prasadam. He wants Pushpana rice. They ran into the kitchen and hurriedly started the rice. Meanwhile, in the temple, the devotees struggled through their version of a Vyasa Puja ceremony. Kirtanananda Swami stood and began to read aloud from the introduction of Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure, which included a short biography of Prabhupada. But Prabhupada interrupted, scolding his disciples for concocting and for acting improperly. If you don't know, he said, then why didn't you ask me how to do this properly? The Japanese guests present didn't understand English, but they could see the spiritual master was disturbed. Prabhupada explained that in devotional service everything must be done properly, according to the parampara method, without concocting. We will observe Vyasa Puja again tomorrow, he said. Come to my room. I will tell you what to do. The next day, after a simple traditional ceremony, the devotees felt ecstatic. Afterward, they agreed. When one displeases his spiritual master, there is no happiness, but as soon as the spiritual master is pleased, the disciple becomes blissful. The Janmashtami Vyasa Puja festival in New Vrindavan had become a nightmare. Hundreds of devotees had converged there from the East Coast, with many others from California and even Europe. They had come for a blissful festival, but instead had found Srila Prabhupada's newly initiated sannyasis expounding a devastating philosophy. The sannyasis, speaking informally to groups here and there, would explain how the devotees had offended Prabhupada and how he had subsequently withdrawn his mercy. The sannyasis revealed their special insights, that Prabhupada was actually God, that none of his disciples had recognized him as such, and that all of them, therefore, beginning with the sannyasis, were guilty of minimizing his position. And that was why Prabhupada had left for India. He had withdrawn his mercy from his disciples. The devotees were devastated. None of them knew what to say in reply. The sannyasis, by their preaching, had projected gloom everywhere, which was proper, they said. Everyone should feel guilty and realize that they had lost the grace of their spiritual master. No use trying to cheer one another up by chanting Hare Krishna or eating a feast. Everyone should accept the bitter medicine. Although Prabhupada had given his disciples 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam, as well as Bhagavad Gita as it is, the Nectar of Devotion, teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and other literature, none of the devotees were well versed in them. Many devotees wondered if the philosophy the sannyasis were preaching was correct, but none of them knew enough of the scriptures to immediately refute it. The devotees turned to the new GBC men, Prabhupada's appointed leaders and guardians of ISKCON. The GBC, along with other senior devotees, began carefully searching through Prabhupada's books to ascertain exactly what he had said about the position of the spiritual master. Then, Hayagriva announced that a letter had just arrived from Srila Prabhupada in Tokyo. As soon as the devotees all gathered under the pavilion roof to hear, Hayagriva read aloud, "My dear sons and daughters," and then Prabhupada listed almost all the New Vrindavan residents. The devotees immediately felt a wave of hope. Just to hear Prabhupada say, "My dear sons and daughters," was a great relief. Hayagriva continued to read, "Please accept my blessings." Prabhupada hadn't rejected them. The letter went on to say that Srila Prabhupada was pleased with the work of the New Vrindavan devotees, and he promised to come and visit them. Soon he would send for other devotees to join him in India, he said. As he described what preaching in India would be like, the devotees became caught up in the momentum of Srila Prabhupada's preaching spirit. They cheered, they felt blissful. Then, Prabhupada specifically referred to the difficulty facing ISKCON. Purge out of New Vrindavan the non-Vrindavan atmosphere that has entered. His letter turned the tide against the Mayavad teachings. The GBC then called a meeting of all disciples in the temple room. Reading selections from the Nectar of Devotion, they established that the spiritual master, although not God, should be honored as much as God because he is the confidential servant of God. Several senior devotees spoke their heart's convictions, citing examples from their association with Prabhupada to prove that he had not rejected them. He was too kind. The sannyasis might feel rejected because of their own guilt, someone said, but they should not project their guilt on others. The false teachings, however, had dealt a blow from which many devotees would need time to recover. Newcomers at the festival were especially unsettled. But the cloud of gloom that had hung over New Vrindavan now lifted, thanks to Srila Prabhupada's timely letter. The sannyasis admitted their confusion. The GBC then phoned Kirtanananda Swami in Tokyo and told him that Prabhupada's letter had resolved most of the problems, but that the sannyasis still held their misconceptions. Hearing this, Prabhupada felt his suspicions confirmed. Certain disciples had been contaminated by the poisonous philosophy from India. Consequently, material desires for power and control had overwhelmed them, even in Prabhupada's presence. Turning to Tamal Krishna, Sudama, and the three sannyasis with him, Prabhupada asked what they thought should be done. With the previous day's philosophic drilling still sharp in their minds, they suggested that anyone teaching Mayavad philosophy should not be allowed to stay within ISKCON. Prabhupada agreed. If the sannyasis continue to preach Mayavad philosophy, he said, they should not be allowed to stay in his temples, but should go out and preach on their own. Tamal Krishna conveyed this message to the GBC in the US, and Prabhupada was satisfied that the problem would be adjusted. He had created his GBC to handle such matters. On September 2nd, Prabhupada wrote Hangsadutta in Germany, quote, regarding the poisonous effect in our society, it is a fact, and I know where from this poison tree has sprung up, and how it affected practically the whole society in a very dangerous form. But it does not matter. Prahlad Maharaj was administered poison, but it did not act. Similarly, Lord Krishna and the Pandavas were administered poison, and it did not act. I think in the same parampara system that the poison administered to our society will not act if some of our students are as good as Prahlad Maharaj. I have therefore given the administrative power to the governing body commission, unquote. To Hayagriva in New Vrindavan, Prabhupada wrote, quote, I am very glad to know that the GBC is actively working to rectify the subversive situation which has been weakening the very foundation of our society. All you members of the GBC, please always remain very vigilant in this connection so that our society's growth may go on unimpeded by such poisonous elements. Your preaching in New Vrindavan, as well as intensified study of our literatures with seriousness, is very much encouraging. Please continue this program with vigor and reestablish the solidity of our movement. From the beginning, I was strongly against the impersonalists, and all my books stressed on this point. So, my oral instruction as well as my books are all at your service. Now you GBC consult them and get a clear and strong idea. Then there will be no more disturbance. The four sannyasis may bark, but still the caravan will pass, unquote. Prabhupada wrote Satsvarup in Boston, quote, I am very glad to know that you are not affected by the propaganda of the sannyasis that I am displeased with. I am very glad to know that you are not affected by the propaganda of the sannyasis that I am displeased with all the members of the society. I am never displeased with any member, unquote. The worst was over, Prabhupada thought. For months, this problem had upset him and his writing. Relentlessly, he had instructed his disciples for their own benefit and for the benefit of his movement. The disease had taken its toll, and that was unfortunate. But the devotees were being forced to turn to Prabhupada's books and apply their teachings, and that was the positive outcome. Now they should clearly understand the position of the spiritual master and never again be led astray by false philosophies or sentiment. Prabhupada's main business in Tokyo was with Dai Nippon. Considering him an important author and a venerable religious monk, they had provided him a car and apartment. Each morning they sent a private car to drive Prabhupada to Imperial Palace Park, where he could take his morning walk. Prabhupada liked the neatly planted trees and gravel walks, and he appreciated the habits of the Japanese people. As he would pass, elderly ladies would bow to him from the waist, and others would fold their hands respectfully, acknowledging his being a holy man. On the morning of Prabhupada's meeting with Dai Nippon, he came out of his apartment with Tamal Krishna and Devananda Maharaj and got into the back seat of a Dai Nippon company car. The car proceeded through the early morning streets, and Prabhupada chanted his Gayatri mantra silently. A Dai Nippon junior executive escorted Prabhupada and his two disciples into an elevator and up to a spacious room with a long conference table. Prabhupada's guide cordially offered him a seat at the table, and Prabhupada sat down with Tamal Krishna and Devananda Maharaj on either side. Soon there entered Dai Nippon's 6 top executives, including the corporation president. Each stood behind his respective chair, and each in turn, beginning with the president, bowed slightly from the waist and presented his calling card. Addressing Prabhupada as Your Divine Grace, they introduced themselves, announced their posts, and took their seats. "We are very honored to have you here," the president began. "You are a great religious author, and it is our great privilege to be publishing your books." After the president had spoken briefly, tea was served. Prabhupada requested hot milk. Conversation was informal, and Prabhupada spoke of the importance of his mission and his Krishna-conscious literature. No one discussed business, however, and the Dai Nippon executives soon excused themselves. They would meet again the next morning. When Prabhupada was again alone in the room with his disciples and the junior executive who had escorted him, he asked the young Japanese, "So, what is your goal in life?" By way of answer, the man gathered up all the business cards that lay scattered before Prabhupada on the table and stacked them with the president's on top, then the first vice president's, and so on, putting his own card in its place on the bottom. He then dramatically removed his card from the bottom of the stack and slapped it on top, a graphic answer to Prabhupada's question. Prabhupada smiled. To become president of the company, he said, was temporary. All material life was temporary. He explained on the basis of Bhagavad Gita that the body was temporary and that the self was eternal. All the identities and positions people hankered after were based on the bodily conception of life and would one day be frustrated. The purpose of life, therefore, was not to become the temporary president of a temporary corporation within the temporary material world, but to realize the eternal soul's relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and gain eternal life. Prabhupada spoke for almost half an hour while the man listened politely. At the next day's meeting, negotiations began. The conference room was different, the table smaller, and 3 of Dai Nippon's international sales representatives sat opposite Prabhupada. Prabhupada presented his price, $1.35 per book. "Oh, Your Divine Grace," one of the salesmen exclaimed, "it is not possible for us to give this price. We will lose too heavily. We cannot afford it." They explained their position, quoting paper costs and other expenses. Prabhupada began to speak about his mission. ISKCON's book distribution, he said, was a charitable work for the benefit of all humanity. ISKCON distributed these books for whatever donations people were able to make, and he received no profit or royalties. It was spiritual education, the most valuable literature. "In any case," Prabhupada said in closing, "you deal with my secretary in this regard. and he sat back in his chair. The burden was on Tamal Krishna. Tamal Krishna began by saying that Prabhupada had been too kind because ISKCON could actually never pay such a high price. He then quoted a price 40 cents lower per book than Prabhupada's quote. Mr. Tamala, the salesmen were again upset. Please reconsider your point. A polite argument ensued. Srila Prabhupada interrupted, presenting himself as an impartial third party. He said he would settle the difference that had arisen between the secretary and the salesman. I have heard both sides, he said, and I feel that the price should be $1.25 per book, that's all. Yes, Your Divine Grace, the salesman agreed. That is right. After further negotiations, Prabhupada agreed on a contract that included a reprint of Volume 1 and a first printing of Volume 2 of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, 2 issues of Back to Godhead, a Hindu issue of Back to Godhead, and a new book, Sri Ishopanishad. ISKCON had to pay only $5,000 cash, and Dai Nippon would deliver everything on credit. Prabhupada held a feast at his apartment for the Dai Nippon executives, who especially liked the samosas and pakoras. They presented Prabhupada with a watch and continued to see to his comfort during his stay in Tokyo. Prabhupada also met a Canadian-born Japanese boy, Bruce, who was seriously interested in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada invited him to come and join him in India, and the boy eagerly agreed.